You're listening to The Reengineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lemense, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-dawn on the internet and get to the facts. This is going to be part 2 of our exploration on trustworthiness and radical honesty, and about the traitor, maybe not so big a traitor, Benedict Arnold. In this episode, we're going to explore why trust is a crucial part of the company, and why global companies and the economy basically run on trust. If you haven't listened to part 1, I really encourage you to go back and listen to that. The science parts of this episode you can listen to on their own. However, we talk a lot about Benedict Arnold, and if you don't have the narrative from the last episode, it may not make that much sense.
Now, on the business side, I'm going to explain to you why trust basically runs all companies, all successful companies. Forbes and Harvard Business Review did a study, and what they came to the conclusion is it's not sweat or money that make a company run. It's trust. Now, trust is going to touch every area of every business. And research has shown that workers at companies where trust is high report 106% greater energy in the office, 74% lower stress levels, 76% greater engagement, and 50% more productivity than their peers in the same position at a low trust company.
Can I ask a question? When you say low trust and high trust in a company, what does that look like? I suspect I work in a low trust company.
I'll tell you how you know. In a high trust company, when someone's off or so there's some turnover, other people will fill in to do that position at a high trust company. They work for each other. In a low trust company, the number one sign of a low trust company, Joe, is people covering their old butt all the time.
Okay.
Bosses spend their time people try to play work and bosses try to catch them playing work. So it's this tattletaling, babysitting work toxic environment.
Oh, I've worked at those. Those suck. I can see putting that on trust, that you have to trust that each other are working. It also kind of reminds me of like people who have records for like re-enlistment in the military. They always say, they're like, what are you doing this for? Are you re-enlisting? Is it the glory? Is it the action? And they always say, it's for my brothers and sisters. It's for the people I am fighting with. They are the reason I'm going back.
That's a great point. And I think the trust thing, too, that what I took from this article, too, is it doesn't mean you have to be best friends. I think that's what we look at, right? Oh, I love where I work. I love my boss. I love all my coworkers. They don't have to be. What it is when someone's down or we need more help in a certain area, everyone lends a hand and becomes more helpful. That's what builds trust in the workplace.
Okay.
Another thing, too, is people assume, kind of the trustworthy face thing, episode 1, they assume that everyone's doing their best. They're not looking to get their coworkers in trouble by tattling on them. They're assuming they do a good job, that they're good in whatever lane they're at, what their specialty is, until they see some evidence to the contrary.
That I have had both. Have you ever been in a work environment where your boss doesn't trust you with anything, and it's kind of like having another parent who is like telling you to clean your room every 5 minutes? It's not just micromanaging, it's they're living in you.
Yeah, and no matter how you do it, it's not right.
Right.
Their way is always better, even though it doesn't make any sense, even though your system could be better. They're not open-minded. They're just critical. And they think that's being a good boss. To me, it's just being critical.
Okay. Yep. Trust is like a paint. Like it seeps into every corner, apparently. I hadn't really thought about this.
It's just a toxic cycle of mistrust when you have leaders that are constantly playing this bad cop. You're in trouble. You're being written up. It just rots the company.
We've talked in our last episode how, we base trust on facial features briefly, like that's our first impression. But if showing guilt demonstrates trust, demonstrates that you're capable of guilt, you're capable of morality, does that mean you can take that to work? Like if I'm at work and I show to my boss that I genuinely feel guilty for something that I was at, I made a mistake in, and I let everyone see that, whether I'm acting or not, does that actually level up my trust in everyone's eyes?
It does. When you step up and say what you've done. See, in my corporate life, I as a connector, I try to get proactive about this before I get to these things. I always try to partner up. I call them a work wife. I always try to partner up with somebody who has a very different skill set than I have, and I try to be of some kind of service to them and them to me. And sometimes that's just being someone you can have lunch with and talk to, and that they vent to, and someone they share things with, and someone you can gossip with. But then when you hook those skills up, so when you start to fall on something, you don't have to do a full-on what do you call it? When you confess, a full-on confess, I screwed this up.
Right.
When you see it slipping, you call on your work husband, your work wife, and say, hey, can you help me? So you burn trust, so you feel more comfortable putting your hand. Not everyone's comfortable doing that, asking for help at work, but it works. People are glad you asked. But you got to ask the right person, and to do that, they have to trust you.
Okay. See, I was mistakenly thinking trust only goes between yourself and your boss. But if you have somebody, if I call in right now, like to work, and I'm like, I'm going to be late, I know the guy that's going to answer, and I know I can trust him to, cover me until I get there, to take over my duties until then.
Yeah, because you're just thinking about who can fire you, and that's not right. You could probably get in just as much trouble from coworkers than you do from the boss if all of them start throwing you under the bus.
Okay, so I can get behind trusting my coworkers, and I can get behind, as a supervisor, trusting the people that I have put in positions to do their job. What if I have had too many bad bosses? What if I cannot? Because honestly, I don't trust any boss above me with really any part of my life. Like, I just do my job and let them know I'm capable. But that's...
Well, and to be fair, you've been scarred.
Right.
You have PTSD. Joe's had the same job for like 15 years, and he's the one that covers for everybody. He's the most trustworthy person there. And he's seen bosses be changed like toilet paper, as I can imagine.
Talking to a new boss that moves in, it's kind of like a cheesy daytime TV soap opera. I'm like, I've been hurt before and I can never love again. Like, that's how my bosses receive me at work.
You have a great point. And this is the problem with trustworthiness. It can be used against us very easily, and we can be manipulated very easily. You see, to trust, Joe, is very human, and it all starts to our brains. Humans are born physically premature, and we are highly dependent on other people to take care of us. We can't survive on our own like a lot of animals can right away. Because of this need, we're hardwired to make social connections.
Okay. To trust and be trusted.
We have to just survive. And so our trust kicks in like really tiny, simple cues. So the negative things, we really have to get hit with a baseball bat. But the positive things, the trust things, we want to warm up to somebody. We want to socially connect with them for survival purposes.
I just want a mom to carry me through the savannah and keep me away from lions. That's all I want.
Being breastfed, I think.
Right, I'll be on somebody's hip.
That's exactly what I just imagined. Yeah, I would. Yeah, I am a mama's boy.
If we're wired for this, if we are born wanting to trust, does that make it like a reflex?
You're absolutely right. It's like a default position. We just trust so routinely all the time in all of our things that we're going to go to that first until someone, like you said, you just get that real creepy feeling, or they do something that you say, okay, that's against my values. I know that that's someone I need to stay away from.
Okay.
Now, even worse than that, everybody thinks that their judgment is better than average in someone else's character. Are you surprised by that?
A little bit. It does remind me of everybody thinks they're above average as a driver, and not everyone can be above average as a driver. Statistically, that's what an average is.
Well, at this at this Harvard business class, the professor said, I routinely find that about 95% of my MBA students place themselves in the upper half when it comes to their ability to size other people up accurately, including how reliable, trustworthy, honest, and fair their classmates are. More than 77% put themselves in 25% of the class, and 20% of them put them in the top 10. So this inflated sense of our own judgment makes us very vulnerable because we trust our instincts. 95% think they're good at it. You'd be the 5%. You'd be the only one.
That makes sense. I'm kind of feeling shaky about answering whether or not I'm a good judge of character now, but if 95% of people think they're in the upper half of judgment, is that going to bite them? Like, is it because they're students and they haven't been burned enough times to be like, well, I am not good at, trusting judgment?
That's a good point. Joe and I hate college small sample studies.
Right.
Because those people are at the top of the world for good reason.
I would love it if they did this survey on like 65-year-old retirees, and they're just like, how many of them are going to say that they can gauge someone's trustworthiness, honestly?
Well, one of the big things about trust being manipulated was the Bernie Madoff scandal. And he illustrated a transitive trust to lull people into security, to give them their life savings. And what he used was a very elite Jewish community.
Okay.
And that's the same thing that all Ponzi schemes do. They usually do something with it's an ethnic. You have to know someone to get in, an invitation in. You have to be at a certain level.
Right. There's a reason pyramid schemes usually target, the first people somebody sells to in a pyramid scheme is like their family and friends. There's a reason for that.
If you can't take advantage of your friends and family, who can you take over?
Right.
And then it has this kind of rollover effect that you immediately trust without doing what, Joe? Your due diligence. Because you want to trust, because you're still that baby and you want to build social connections. You want to trust people. Trust first is the way we're built.
Right. I want Daddy Madoff to take my money and do something useful with it so I don't have to be burdened by that. Okay. If you're telling me that trust is a function we're born with, it's our default, and everybody thinks they're good at gauging whether or not somebody is trustworthy, what is trust for? Like, evolution-wise, why would we be born with this mechanism? I guarantee you. Okay, so a world without trust just looks like fish eating other fish. Why weren't we born like that socially?
We want trustworthy. We want to get these social connections so we can get more opportunities. And more opportunities means more security and more comforts.
Okay.
Now, what does it mean to have low social and economic status, Joe? What does that mean to you?
Well, we've covered episode after episode, because I keep putting it in there basically, where we talk about how low socioeconomic status effectively leaves you out of several loops. You don't have as many safety nets. You don't have as many school choices. You don't live in better locations. Effectively, you are slowly funneled into the places where America wants you to live, so that you can keep working for America.
You're dead on. Limited resources and limited opportunities, limited educational, limited opportunities, period.
Right.
So, and then if you have more, you have more resources, more leisure, less stress. But the lower socioeconomic have the burden of more stress too.
Right. We talked in an episode about how in a low socioeconomic class, if you are in poverty, it's the same as burning out 13 IQ points or something like that. Like, you literally have less mental capacity to do other things because you are so burdened by low economy, low opportunity.
And trust isn't just a tool. It isn't a luxury. What it is, let's say you and I are both Harvard grads. We're businessmen in Boston. And my son graduates. Of course, he goes to the same school that we went to, Harvard. And you graciously offer him a position in your company that he would never get in my company or in any other company because of what? Your trust with me and you're building connections with me. And I in turn will do that same thing for your daughter when she gets out of Harvard. Well, not Harvard. When she gets out of Wellesley.
Right. Both our kids have checked several boxes about education and upbringing. So yeah, it's just pure opportunism.
So on trust issues, which social class, which end of it do you think you could trust more? People with more resources or the people with less?
We have had episodes about how the rich don't lie any less or more than a normal person. The distributions about dishonesty and things like that they're not tied to economic class. However, just me as a person, I kind of don't trust rich people as much as I should.
Well, there's a study done, and we'll give the show notes to a Paul Piff study. And what they did was they were in San Francisco, and they made a note of different levels of cars, and they checked the driver's age, and they went from Ferraris all the way down to Hyundais. So they did the elite $100,000 cars, and then they did the entry level cars, and they did the middle. And what they found, 30% of the lower class, the lowest end, the Hyundais, the cheaper cars, the commuter cars, every single driver stopped when someone was walking the crosswalk, because by California law, you have to stop when someone's in a crosswalk.
Oh my God. How did they, okay. For this study, did they just follow little old ladies and wait for them to cross?
They had one guy.
They had a guy do it.
Yeah, they had a guy do it, but that's still a dangerous job. I wouldn't want to. I'd rather be experimental medicine or something than walk in traffic in San Francisco all day.
I would love to be that person's like spouse or girlfriend or whatever, like where it's like, what'd you do today, hon? It's like, I walked into traffic again
all day long
for a study. Yeah.
So the lower social class, the poorer people, every single one of them stopped. But as you moved up to the nicer cars, up into the Mercedes or the upper income ones, only about 30% of the drivers didn't stop. They just broke the law and cut the pedestrian off. Heavens forbid they kill somebody. I mean, they have to get to wherever they have to get to, right?
Okay. If the wealthier cars, like the BMWs and the Lambos, are willing to break the law and speed up so they don't have to wait for a pedestrian, that does not invalidate our previous studies we've covered where we talk about how wealthy people don't lie any more or less than less wealthy people. It just means that they have a different set of priorities, and those priorities may not make them as trustworthy in the eyes of somebody like me who need to cross at a crosswalk once in a while.
And the super wealthy, seems to get a little calloused when it comes to human life, we've found in most of our studies.
Right. We had both a celebrity insulation episode and a episode about wealth. And we covered Paul Piff's studies and a Wired article that was fantastic about how wealth calluses you. So I can see that callousing factor into trust. I can see that also factoring into guilt. We talked about how guilt is a indicator of whether or not you are trustworthy. If you have calloused yourself with wealth over the years, you're not going to express guilt about having that Lamborghini or having that BMW. You're going to hit the accelerator.
Well, I'm not done with the study yet, but you finished the study out for me.
Oh, God. Okay. Sorry about that.
So 100% of the entry-level cars, the poor people stop. 30% of the BMWs, Mercedes didn't stop. But of the Ferraris, the Lamborghinis, the Bentleys, almost 50% of the drivers broke the law, sped up, cut off the driver.
Okay. I was pulling cars out of a hat. Like, these were just my stereotypical assumptions, but glad to hear that those stereotypes exist for a reason.
For me, trustworthiness didn't work in the business side because we're doing this in all of our affairs, our romantic affairs, our friends, our family, and since we spend most of our life, Joe, at work, right?
Right.
We want to work for a company we trust and with people we trust. Doing research for the show, 3 of my friends have sat in on interviews, because nowadays a lot of times interviews are group interviews, and they'll have people who are, subordinates in there interviewing too to see if there's something they want to work with, someone they could trust. They've watched their boss promise unrealistic incomes, just outright lie to these new hires.
Oh, I was having a problem equating that for a second, and then I remembered it's in sales. So you mean like they'll say, oh, one of our salesmen makes X amount, and it's an unrealistic amount. It's like one of our salesmen is so good, they make 7 houses a month.
And they might not lie about that. Commissions is easy to lie about, right? Because it is true, one person did. They omit that that's the owner's kid, and he got given that account.
Right, and it's like a record.
Yeah, and it was just this dumb luck thing. But there's other ways to lie about hourly pay, too. You can promise a certain amount of overtime. You can promise less work. And the big one is promising these made-up, exaggerated promotions.
Right. I've certainly had that happen. Like at the job I currently work, when I first joined, they promised that they promote from within. And they also talked about how there is a time cap that you won't be asked to do more than X amount of overtime. And here we are it's not just the pandemic. I found out that the way my company oftentimes runs is they prefer to run on a skeleton crew where everybody does overtime almost as a matter of course. And we have now had a couple of bosses that have come in from the outside, that they were hired, not from the inside, but like I was told, but they have been hired in a way where it made me think that they were looking for people with a certain value set. I wouldn't say skill set. Somebody who is from the outside, so it would feel more like a captain-crew relationship where they don't know us as well, and so they can order us around a little bit more comfortably.
So they can abuse you more.
Right, exactly. So they don't have to feel bad because it's not their friends they're abusing.
Insulate, callous themselves to these. It's your turn to beat these people.
Long ago when we started writing this episode, you were kind of musing about the idea that maybe trustworthiness could be worth more than being shrewd in business. After reading about trustworthiness, do you still believe that?
Absolutely. And it's proof in the studies about how businesses do better when people aren't telling on each other and people are stepping up, helping each other out and trust their boss and are transparent. And I don't think transparent is just a negative thing, too. I think it's important for business to be transparent with wins. Right. And with how people are treated and when someone does something good, as opposed to just always Joe's the best and trying to hold Todd down or vice versa.
Right.
And during our talk, and you're talking about the first thing that popped into your head was your connection with your boss, right? How much you can trust them. But I think it's very important to become a connector at work and work with other groups and work with other companies. And be a connector between those companies, too. So you become a connector not just in your workplace, but in all of your affairs, all your groups. What do you think about that?
You and I have talked about how friend groups, if you zoom out and look at the way friends connect with each other from a distance, they look like if you were to map out your friends and all of your friends' friends on a piece of whiteboard or like a chalkboard, it would look like a chemical bond. And the people who are the smartest, most informed people they are hubs in these networks. They have multiple friend groups. They have multiple work groups. They are what Todd is calling a connector. I'm taking that literally. I'm thinking back on this study where it's like you look like you're the middle of a chemical bond. I don't think you can be that without high trust. Like, I think all the groups that you connect to, they all have to trust you, right?
You do. You have to be a value. You have to be an honest person. Now, there's a big hack on this because not everyone's comfortable becoming a connector. And sometimes people they haven't been at their job 15 years. They're not an expert like you are. They haven't written as long as you have in your writing groups. So they don't feel comfortable going into each group of being a value. You have to have some skills to fit into different groups.
Right. You can be a connector either by your proficiency, that you're an expert in something, or you can be a connector to multiple groups just by sheer tenacity and charisma. You can just say,
you nailed it. And that's the hack.
Yeah.
You hang around a connector. Batman and Robin, baby.
Yep.
And you will pick it up and you will get connected faster. It'll shave years off the process.
Okay. I like it. I like that trustworthy hack. So far in our trustworthy hacks, we have be a connector, hang out with connectors, and be capable of guilt. Just show that you're capable of it. You mentioned trust goes out the window when you find somebody who is not transparent, that they keep things close to the vest. They prove themselves untrustworthy by how much they don't share. Speaking of that, do you want to talk a little bit about Joseph Reed, the lawyer who is
the evil lawyer? Ominous
evil
music.
Well, okay. I want to clear the air a little bit on Joseph Reed. I want to talk about why it is that he is so trusted and why it might be flim flam and publicity. Like it might be sort of the what do you call it? The mere exposure effect, where you're just like, you're out in the public so much people trust him.
Yeah, as a politician, I get it.
Okay, so let's get a little bit into the supervillain who is trying to take down Benedict Arnold. Some historians are going to come kill me in the night, by the way. They're going to send a assassin from some ancient fraternal order to murder me for talking bad about Joseph Reed.
The journal entry from one of his staff members at his house.
History textbooks that side with Joseph Reed especially, they're going to send people for me. Joseph Reed was a lawyer from Philadelphia, and he was a secretary and aide-de-camp to Washington, meaning that he was a colonel in the army. He was Washington's right-hand man and traveled with him and advised him.
Okay.
It also meant that, like, when they were in combat, he was next to Washington. So he probably wasn't on the front lines. He was probably up on the hill watching the battle, from Washington's
nice safe
side.
distance.
Right.
Up on your horse, yeah. No bullets in your gun. You don't need them.
Right. If you want to talk about trustworthiness, this is, to me, the best example of how much of a shyster Joseph Reed was. Washington had him sort of in his tent, like hung out with him a lot, advised him on, took his advice for everything he did. One time, Washington accidentally opened one of Joseph Reed's letters, and it was an honest mistake. It got delivered with his packet of mail, basically, and discovered that Joseph Reed had been sending letters behind Washington's back to one of Washington's generals, a man named Charles Lee, who had switched sides. He had served the British in the 7 Years' War, and he had switched to the American side.
And for our younger listeners, you do not read someone else's letters.
No.
It's just like reading someone else's texts. You don't do that.
You'll never find anything good. If it's about you, it's going to be bad. So this other general, he wasn't suspect. Like, he had served with the British, he had served with the Americans. The more important note here is that switching sides was actually pretty darn common. And Washington read his right-hand man, his personal secretary, and his colonel. All these were one person, Joseph Reed. He found Joseph Reed talking about how inept Washington's decisions were and how he wasn't doing the right thing for the army.
The George Washington, the first
George
president of the United States, our hero.
Right. So instead of, and mind you, this isn't, like when I say Joseph Reed is talking to Washington, they really are arm in arm. You said you want to find a connector and make, become their Robin to his Batman. Joseph Reed was the Robin to Washington's Batman. And so he is this close to Washington, and yet he's willing to badmouth him behind his back.
It was a political move for him, but
yeah,
someone that he should have probably exterminated and not trusted later, right? With anything on Benedict Arnold.
Well, that's kind of what happens. Washington stops trusting Joseph Reed, stops taking his advice. Washington doesn't blow up at him or yell at him or do anything mean. He leaves him twisting in the wind. He simply writes an apology for opening Reed's letter, tells him he read it, but that's it. He leaves him. And Washington people remember Washington as this calm, cool general who gave speeches. He was a hothead, like especially in his youth. He was, a hard charger. He wanted to lead, into battle. He wanted to have glory. And at this point in his life, he had started calming down. He had started learning what being a leader actually meant.
Less I'm going to take my wooden teeth out and kick your ass.
Right. Somebody hold my teeth while I beat this guy's head in.
He's a big dude, too.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day, he's a giant.
Oh, a George Washington beating would go on all week. It would be bad.
George Washington is tough. I mean, leading these missions where soldiers almost starved to death, and a lot of people would have surrendered and turned around, and he never did.
Right. So Washington does not beat Joe Reed within an inch of his life. He just leaves him in the cold, like socially. Like he stops talking to him, stops trusting him.
Ghost him.
Yeah. You want to talk about proving untrustworthy. This is what happened with Joseph Reed. But Joseph Reed, he kind of made a bounce back. He did a couple of things we'll talk about where like he starts bad-mouthing loyalists, basically. We mentioned that he hung Quakers and that he tried and was the leading prosecutor for people who wouldn't join the Revolutionary Army or who were possibly connected to loyalists. He was really good at that, prosecuting people who might have had, questionable sides. Even if they were conscientious objectors, pacifists, he hung them too. Didn't matter. So because of this, because he was so outspokenly for America, even though he was willing to talk shit about, his American general, he was loved by Congress. He sided with Congress in a lot of issues, and he was really untouchable. So we mentioned he served in battles. He was never wounded. Now, I think it's because he was near Washington. Congress and the public both took that as, oh, he's just that good at war. Like this Joseph Reed guy must be, really good on the battlefield if he's never been wounded. He was offered the position of brigadier general, ironically the position Benedict Arnold really wanted, and he turned it down. Joseph Reed also turned down being Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he declined both. Here's a bit of possible propaganda, and this is another thing that might piss off some historians. Congress loved Joseph Reed, possibly because once he was offered a bribe of £10,000 if he would help reunite the British and the colonies, the uppity American colonies who wanted to be independent or whatever. Joseph Reed refused. Whatever British officer was reaching out to him to offer him £10,000, which is a huge bribe. That's enough to set you up for life. He told them no. I'm going to read this quote that was published in the newspaper from Joseph Reed when he's refusing the offer in a very baller move. He says, "I am not worth purchasing, but such as I am, the King of Britain is not rich enough to do it."
Oh, that's pretty, yeah.
It's very ballsy, and it's very flashy, and it's very public relation-y.
I was going to say,
it was
he
printed
probably
in
shared that
newspapers.
with every single person, every single government official.
He did.
Personally.
This is why Congress loved him. But I've also, we're going to link to the articles that I'm mentioning, so people don't think I'm making this up. There's a good chance that never happened, and that Reed simply published that he responded that way to a bribe, just so he could sort of, like hanging Quakers and loyalists, this might be yet another thing Reed did to make himself seem like he was an ultra-American, that he was so for liberty.
And I think of that high amount, he had already stolen way more, pirated more money than that already.
Right, yeah.
So he knew he'd be hung and wouldn't be able to spend the money anyway, so I'm not going to give him too much credit for that.
Right. You betray George Washington, well, then you just go tell the newspapers that, hey, I may have, Washington may have not trusted me anymore, but look at this. I, rejected a bribe, and look how awesome I am. Eventually he was elected to Congress. So he became, a congressman in 1778, and he became the president. Okay, I'm going to read the full title, because he wasn't president of the United States. He was president of Pennsylvania. His full title was Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, but he's not just some attorney. He's somebody. He's a powerful political figure.
Right, exactly. So this is a man who effectively bolstered and potentially mythologized his entire reputation and turned down the rank Benedict Arnold wanted. And meanwhile, here Benedict Arnold is butting heads with him almost at every turn, like defending somebody against Reed, or giving somebody the lawyer fees to defend themselves against Reed, and butting heads with him about, Grace Galloway, like ejecting an old lady from her apartment. And of course, Arnold is a serious bloods and guts hero from the battlefield, and Joseph Reed has been frozen out by Washington. So these guys are pretty much polar opposites at this point. So Joseph Reed, by 1778, makes it his life's mission utterly to ruin Benedict Arnold. He dragged out a trial of Benedict Arnold for months and months and months. Benedict Arnold, there weren't really anything to convict him on. Like, we will talk about this in our next episode, exactly what the charges were. Arnold basically, he had, I think, 15 or 18 charges levied against him. Almost all of them were fully made up, and some of them just sound so silly they don't sound like real charges.
It was a witch hunt for his head.
It was a witch hunt for his head, and it was led by basically the new president of Pennsylvania and the leader of Congress, Joseph Reed. And Joseph Reed turned all of his power against Arnold, basically. So if you are Benedict Arnold, if you are the hero of the revolution so far, and you've got this a-hole lawyer on your back, and nobody is listening to you for help, how long before you say, screw this guy, screw Congress, I am out? Trustworthiness is skin deep at first, but over time, trustworthiness becomes a matter of guilt. Does the used car salesman seem like he's capable of guilt? Because if someone shows guilt, that they're capable of feeling genuine remorse for their actions, it means they want to be benevolent. If our car salesman watches an 80-year-old widow drive off the lot in a lemon and turns to you and says, "God, that felt awful," it demonstrates a sense of right and wrong. Guilt-prone equals trustworthy. Period. Benedict Arnold demonstrated guilt. Writing to Washington, full of grief and vulnerability. You know who didn't seem bothered by his guilt, like at all? Joseph Reed, the lawyer who badmouthed his commanding officer, hanged pacifists, and moved into an old woman's manor after she lost everything. Reed felt righteous, justified about it. He was in the correct political party at the moment, and he wore it like white armor wherever he went. Trustworthiness is necessary to business. Trustworthiness is a hack to get people to buy into your company. And the road sign to trustworthiness is the capacity for guilt. So I want to ask you an important question. When was the last time you heard anyone in politics, in Congress, or anyone from Facebook or Amazon express profound guilt? You know what we've heard a lot of lately? I was justified. I was right. I did it because it was the American thing to do. Want to know who's going to get my vote? The first politician who says, I can do better, and means it. We can all do better. And saying it out loud will make you and your business more trustworthy.
You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week. You can connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com.
That's where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We appreciate feedback. We love spirited debates. And tune in next week, because then we're going to get into Benedict Arnold and his trials and radical honesty.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.